Catalans are heading back to the polls to replace the leaders Madrid kicked out after the region's push for independence. Will this be the end of the rift? I'm Imran Gupta, and today's Newsmaker is Catalonia's regional election. It was never meant to happen this year, but Spanish Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy had other ideas. Following the outlawed independence referendum in October, Catalonia has been in turmoil. And this election to replace the sacked Catalan government is supposed to ease the tension. But could it potentially make things worse? 3 of the 7 candidates still strongly favour breaking away, and polls say it's too close to call. So, will this vote heal the division between Madrid and Barcelona, or could this trigger a new push for secession? Vanessa Keneally reports.
Standing tall for independence, these Castellers are using a tradition to show solidarity ahead of Thursday's elections for Catalan's regional parliament.
This time, many people will go out and vote, and I hope independence parties win with a majority of votes to work for a future republic.
These parliamentary elections are the first time voters will return to the polls since a referendum on independence on October the 1st. Spain's Constitutional Court declared the referendum illegal and turnout was low, but most of those who did vote wanted to split from Madrid. That vote created political turmoil and deeply impacted Catalonia's economy. The number of visitors to the region has fallen by nearly 5%. Almost 3,000 companies have moved their headquarters out of the region, and in November, Catalonia experienced its largest monthly increase in unemployment since the crushing recession of 2009. There's also the question of whether Catalonia would join the European Union if the region did become independent. This month, 45,000 people gathered in Brussels to oppose what they say is the EU siding with Madrid. It was also a show of support for former Catalan leader Carles Puigdemont. He and 4 of his former ministers travelled to Brussels to avoid arrest at home. They face charges of sedition and misuse of public funds in Spain after declaring Catalonia independent after October's referendum result.
Is there any place in the world that holds demonstrations like this to support criminals? No. Maybe we are not criminals. Maybe we are Democrats. And so there is an opportunity for Europe with what is happening in Catalonia.
Back in Catalonia, 7 political parties are campaigning for votes. Candidates who aren't jailed and haven't left the country lined up ahead of a televised debate. Their policies range from wanting independence from Madrid.
The Spanish state is allergic to democracy. It is so allergic to us practicing democracy, as we are now or did on October 1st, that it completely alters the rules of the game.
To wanting things to stay the same.
You all should be in the opposition and give way to a democratic government that is concerned with real problems faced by Catalans, that concentrates on prioritizing the needs of the majority of people, which is not independence.
The Spanish Prime Minister was the person who dissolved the Catalan Parliament, imposed direct rule on the region, and called for these snap elections. And he's confident they will lead to unity.
Yo quiero comenzar esta intervención diciendo que debéis sentiros orgullosos lo que estáis defendiendo en esta campaña electoral. Todos los que defendemos la democracia, la Constitución y la ley somos garantes y somos representantes del lado bueno de esta historia, que lo hay.
Thursday's vote is expected to draw a record turnout, but with polls pointing towards a dead heat between the main pro-independence party and those who want to stay with Madrid, will it resolve the crisis or prolong it? Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
Well, to discuss this, I'm joined from Barcelona by Adri Alsina. He's the international press officer for the pro-independence Catalan National Assembly. And in London, we have political analyst Javier Farge. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers. Javier, let me ask you about this vote. The leaders who had the support of the street in October in the independence vote, even though Madrid didn't recognize it. Those who had the street are either in exile or in jail. Doesn't that take the shine off these elections, and people might question whether they are fully representative or free and fair?
It is pretty obvious that the decision to put them in prison was a political decision. There might be some kind of a varnish of legality, but it was a political decision. However, and we have to be very clear about this, and maybe our colleague in Barcelona may disagree with this, is that the majority of people in Catalonia did not vote in 2015 for parties that support independence. And in the October illegal referendum, or an accepted referendum, if you want to use that word, the majority of people did not turn up to vote. It takes a bit of the shine, yes, but also at the same time, the pro-independence party have been campaigning freely. They have set up their own candidatures, they have set up their own program, and the opinion poll seems to suggest that they are neck and neck with Citizens, which was until some time ago an irrelevant party in Catalonia, and they are, as we know, the Citizens, Ciudadanos, is a unionist party. Mm-hmm. So even though it takes away some of the shine of the elections, the pro-independence party are free to vote. And not only that, this should be an incentive for the pro-independence movement to vote for independence, for pro-independence parties, considering the fact that the main leaders are in prison.
Right. Adria, are these elections more representative and a more accurate representation of what people feel really in Catalonia rather than the October election?
I think they are different situations. In October the 1st, what we had was a referendum. People were being called to vote on whether they wanted independence or not. We had a 43% turnout, but it's true that 700,000 people could not vote, or their vote could not be counted. So we don't really know exactly what the turnout would have been if all those votes could have been counted, and especially if over 1,000 voters hadn't been beaten up when they were trying to cast their ballot. And now what we have is a very strange election, because you can't really label it as democratic when it has not been called by the government of Catalonia, when most of the candidates are either in prison or in exile, when, for instance, there's been a crackdown on social media, on websites. The website of the Catalan National Assembly, for instance, of the ANC, which is the major pro-independence organization, is still blocked, remains blocked by the Spanish police, by the Guardia Civil, without any notification whatsoever. And also many acts, many events have been banned. Also, the Catalan National Assembly has been banned from campaigning in the streets, whereas Ciudadanos, the party that supports Spain, that supports the government of Spain, the government of Spain's strategy, has been able to campaign freely on the major squares and streets of Catalonia. About that. Okay. Not everybody has been able to do that.
So Javier, when you say Ciudadanos are sort of pushing this anti-separatism or anti-independence revolt, pro-unity revolt, what Adria is saying is that is not coming from the ground up. Rather, the government is making it easy for them to do well and to create that impression. What do you think?
I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that. If the pro-independence party, the main pro-independence party, believe that this is not a democratic election, why are they taking part? It reminds me Venezuela, when the opposition takes part, and then when they lose, they say, well, actually, it's not our fault, it's the government's fault. It's very similar. If it's not a democratic process, why are they taking part? In relation to what he said about the referendum, the 1st of October referendum, it is true that there was a great deal of repression, which was regrettable, and it has to be condemned, because the way they behave against unarmed people was appalling, but that cannot be considered the reason why the majority of people did not turn up to vote. At the same time, we mustn't forget that in the 2015 local elections, only 48% of people voted for pro-independence parties.
Right.
If we're going to deny the democratic element of this particular election, let's go to the last one, and still the majority of Catalonians do not want independence.
Let me take something that you said there. So Adria, Javier makes an interesting point there, and he condemns what he calls repression. There are a lot of people don't. A lot of people who support Madrid's position say there wasn't any repression. So it's interesting to hear that from Javier. And I myself, when I spoke to young people there, many of them were on the fence. But then the day after, when they saw police beating up their fellow Catalans, they decided they want to push for independence and they want to become secessionists. Be that as it may, and as Javier said, that is regrettable. Adria, would you agree that doesn't make the referendum any less illegal? It was still illegal under Spanish law. Just because police beat people up, it didn't suddenly make the movement a righteous one, right?
No, that doesn't make it right or wrong. The vote was illegal according to the Spanish government and according to most Spanish institutions. It was legal according to the Parliament of Catalonia. It depends on what institution you believe the most. But that's another matter. I just wanted to clarify. I never said I didn't think the elections were democratic. I said they weren't fully democratic, or you wouldn't be able to label them as fully democratic. I never said we would not recognize the result.
But are they democratic enough for you to take part in?
We have always recognized. I mean, we will recognize the result because we'll never hide when the ballots are put in front of us. We will recognize the result. What we are asking is exactly to the Spanish government whether they will recognize the result in case the pro-independence parties take it, in case the pro-independence parties win and revalidate their absolute majority. Will the Spanish government, will Mr. Mariano Rajoy recognize and acknowledge they were wrong and that they applied 155 and direct rule against the majority of the Catalan population?
Well, this is going to be interesting because they have, and that's why they called for the election. Let's have a little listen to what Mariano Rajoy had to say very recently about what he wants to see happening during this election.
I know the Catalan economy is paying the price of so much lack of loyalty and so many adventurers. But I can assure you, we will heal the wound caused by this rupture by filling the ballot boxes with votes.
That's interesting. So, Javier, here's a man who was, calling them separatists, they were causing havoc, they were traitors, and so on. Now he's saying he's going to heal the wounds after this election. Should Catalans really trust him? Because he was really, really harsh on them over the past 2 months because he believed they were treasonous.
The irony is that Mr. Mariano Rajoy, who was a weak prime minister because he didn't get a clear majority in the last 2 elections, has become now a strong man in Spain. Actually, the Catalonian pro-independence movement have done Mr. Rajoy a big favor. Now he is stronger than ever, and the calls for him to resign have been completely sort of fizzled away because of this situation. Of course, the Catalonians who are pro-independence don't have any reasons to trust him. By the way, when our colleague in Barcelona says that the government banned the referendum, the referendum is banned by the constitution, under which the Catalonian regional government has been ruling the region. So it's not the government, it's the constitution that doesn't allow pro-independence referenda. But again, that's another matter. In relation to Rajoy, yes, I mean, but the problem we have here at the moment is that because of the stubbornness of the pro-independence movement, not everybody, but some of them, many of the parties within Spain who would have liked to have a more flexible approach to independence were cornered because basically what the pro-independence movement was doing is breaking the actual law under which they are supposed to operate. So it consolidated Rajoy's mandate, which is ironic because before all this nonsense, all this mess, he was quite weak. But at the same time, I understand why they might have reasons. Now, unless there's going to be a fraud or the elections are going to be rigged, there's no reason to believe that the result cannot be recognized. So they cannot trust him politically, but if the pro-independence movement is as strong as they claim to be, and I doubt it, then this is the chance they have to consolidate their position and then force Spain to negotiate some kind of settlement, if not to get, maybe not to get independence, but to increase the autonomy of Catalonia, because the 1978 constitution that created these regional governments is very old, it's almost 40 years old, and it has to be refreshed.
So then let me ask you, Adria, are you now in a position where you're willing to say, hey, let's get a better deal? Because the argument before the referendum was argue for a better deal, don't push to break away. You have a good thing going. Maybe you're not happy with some of the funds that are being taken out of Catalonia. Maybe you're not happy that Madrid disrespects you. Get a better deal. don't break away and form a new country. Is that back on the table now, given that Madrid seems to have won and the pro-independence movement had the zip and the sting taken out of its momentum over the past 2 months?
I think it's very cynical to suggest that a better deal, as they say, is the best solution. Of course, a better deal is always the best solution, and of course the pro-independence movement has always willing to sit on the table. Problem is that on the other side of the table, there's never been anyone to sit down with and to discuss with. Mariano Rajoy refused once and again in 2014, in 2015, in 2016 to sit down at the table with different Catalan presidents who were asking for either deals, for negotiations on referendum and not referendum, and on better deals for Catalonia. There's never been any will, any goodwill from the other side. So it's very cynical to suggest such.
Okay, so Javier, let me add to that the fact that if Puigdemont returns from Brussels, it's very likely he'll go to jail, right? So doesn't Adria have a point that there isn't really the goodwill from the other side, because they want to crush this leadership that pushed for that vote that they said was illegal?
Well, they have dropped the legal case against Puigdemont, so he can go back, and I'm sure that they can negotiate this. By the way, the problem I have with what our colleague in Catalonia said is that we wanted to negotiate. No, we wanted to negotiate independence, and the government was never, in Spain, was never going to accept that as a basis for a negotiation. So there was no way they were going to be able to negotiate that. They couldn't do that because in order for a referendum on independence to take place, there has to be a reform of the of the 1978 Spanish Constitution, reform approved by the majority of Congress in Spain, to be able to go ahead with this. So it was impossible for the government in Spain, whether it's Rajoy or Zapatero, whoever, to negotiate with the pro-independence movement when the basic condition for them was to negotiate independence, which is something that they were never going to accept. So it was very difficult for the government in Spain to negotiate under those conditions. At the same time, I think it's important, and I've said it before, that the 1978 Constitution has aged. It's 40 years old next year. It has to be renewed because things have changed a lot in Spain, and there is a need to extend the autonomous powers of the regional assemblies and the regional governments to make the situation better and to prevent this kind of suicidal pro-independence movement in Catalonia, which, let's face it, it has totally failed. I don't think Puigdemont will go to prison. I think the government will have to show some kind of flexibility to prevent a crisis from becoming worse, and some negotiation to extend this regional powers might be the best solution, and reform the 1978 Constitution, which has aged, to make it more adaptable to the modern times that Spain is living at the moment.
Adria, looking at how it might work if the election goes your way, as far as I understand, secessionist winners would need the backing of the CUP. They're radical leftists. They demand immediate unilateral independence for Catalonia. So then the elections go your way, you need the help of the CUP, they say we need to break away, they call for breaking away, and won't we just see October repeat itself and we'll see Madrid clamp down and we're back to square one, right?
Well, I think Madrid doesn't have a plan for what happens if pro-independence parties wins. They've bet all their power on reaching a majority of pro-union parties, and now they're starting to see that may not get their will. They are starting to see that perhaps the Popular Party, the PP, the ruling party in Spain, might come in last in Catalonia and become utterly irrelevant, and so they don't have a plan B. So again, the question is, will they acknowledge, will they recognize this result and therefore recognize a government, a pro-independence government in Catalonia or not? If you recognize a pro-independence government in Catalonia, you have to sit down with them and start negotiating. Start negotiating what? A referendum, better deal, whatever. I mean, you have to sit down to the table and bring some options, bring some proposals. Again, what has never happened in the past, not in the 90s, not in the 2000s, not in the 2010s, is that the Spanish government has never come down to negotiate this better deal, as they say. Not referendum, no better tax, no better financing, no better laws, no better culture protection, nothing. So again, it's very cynical. Yeah, of course there could be a better deal, and I think even the coup might be inclined to negotiate at first, or not. But problem is there's never been that offer. So again, the question is, Mr. Rajoy, Mr. Prime Minister, would you sit down the table and start negotiating with a pro-independence government or not? Because otherwise, why are we holding these elections?
So Javier, is the lesson then for Mariano Rajoy, treat these people with a bit more respect and you might actually get what you want without any trouble, and Spain will be strengthened?
Oh, I agree with that. I agree with that. It should be negotiations. That's the only way you can get out of this mess. Our colleague says that the government in Spain doesn't have a plan, but the pro-independence movement doesn't have a plan either, because they declare independence, and what then? So everybody is in a bit of a sort of a mess at the moment. And in a way, maybe the fact that there isn't a plan is a blessing in disguise, because you can start negotiating from the scratch. Now, there's going to be a reform of the 1978 Constitution. I think any negotiation will have to go through some kind of reform of this old 40-year-old constitution. And of course, I agree with you. Rajoy has to start treating the pro-independence movement with more respect, because not everybody is a radical who wants to bring down the government in Spain. They have genuine sort of concerns about their own identity in Catalonia.
Okay, gentlemen, I've got to move on, but it's been a pleasure talking to both of you. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers, Javier Farge and Adria Alsina. Still to come, Cambodia gets a major boost in investment and political support from China, but at what cost? And Kazakhstan's president has promised reforms, but critics say the government is becoming increasingly authoritarian. We speak with the country's former prime minister. We've been looking at Cambodia this week, and one of its biggest benefactors is China. Almost 40 years ago, Beijing protected the country from invading Vietnamese troops. Today, it's arguably protecting Cambodia from EU and US sanctions. Cambodian Prime Minister Hun Sen is trying to extend his 32-year rule with a crackdown on opposition parties. And as the West tries to pile on the pressure, China keeps helping them out by building roads and bridges. In a minute, we'll debate what's in it for Beijing. But first, Sandra Gatman brings us this special report.
Asia's powerhouse is spending big, and Cambodia is cashing in. Billions of dollars in Chinese investment in development and infrastructure are giving this historically weak economy an unprecedented boost. China is also bringing in tourists. More than 20 mainland cities now offer direct flights to Cambodia's sites. Custodians of the Angkor Wat temple say crowds are reaching unmanageable levels, but Cambodian officials welcome the income.
In the year 2016, we got over 5 million tourists. The first one is Vietnamese, but this year we do expect the Chinese tourists will be on the top. It generates over 300 to 400 million US dollar. This is a big amount.
Phnom Penh has become an investor's playground of luxury apartments, hotels, and golden casinos, where money appears to grow on golden trees.
Phnom Penh's skyline has changed dramatically, with Chinese companies pouring in millions of dollars into commercial projects. But China's influence and investment in Cambodia reaches far beyond real estate.
Cambodia's ruling party describes China as an all-weather friend. Critics blame Beijing for supporting the violent regime of Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. But China did drive out an invasion by Cambodia's old enemy, Vietnam. As part of China's One Belt, One Road initiative, the region's poorer members are getting investment and even military aid. But in return, countries are paying political favors. In July, Cambodia blocked efforts to condemn China's actions over disputed territory in the South China Sea, breaking ranks with fellow members of the ASEAN bloc.
China has succeeded. ASEAN has failed to form that united front. And furthermore, one of its important members, the Philippines, has also switched sides from being pro-American to being pro-China. receiving a lot of aid and support in exchange, you see.
But Cambodian officials are proud of their relationship with China. They see their country emerging from a post-war era of serving Western interests and relying on foreign aid.
From 1970 to 79, there were a number of ideology over here, geopolitics over here, break Cambodia apart, like a Middle East nation right now. So that we wish to have peace without interfering from the outsiders.
You do criticize Western countries for having interfered in Cambodia, but it's no secret that China, a major partner of the Cambodian government, also has a lot of influence here.
We don't want to be like to address of China. We don't want to be server to address of the Western. The world right now is a globalization, open society. The China give us a road, a bridge, and like a foreign direct investment. To build a country, we want to see prosperity to catch up with our neighboring country.
But Cambodia's development has come at a cost. This area used to be a lake, but it's since been filled with sand to make room for a high-end residential and commercial complex.
This is Bangkok. Some of us are still here, but many families were evicted.
For 10 years, Pan has been fighting to keep her home.
This is our land, and we poverty-stricken residents don't have any rights, while the rich and these new Chinese companies can do whatever they want.
Neth is also an activist, but says she's been threatened with jail if she keeps up the protests.
The government hasn't given us compensation, but when we protest, they confront us and jail us. This is the kind of development Cambodia is living.
Critics say China's investment power is fueling corruption and in turn eroding human rights and political freedom. They fear that Cambodia's rapid rise may be leaving the most vulnerable behind. Sandra Gatman, The Newsmakers, Phnom Penh.
Well, joining me now from Phnom Penh is Soy Sopiep. He's the former assistant to the Cambodian Ministry of Information. In Chapel Hill, North Carolina, is Sebastian Strangio. He's a journalist and the author of the book Hun Sen's Cambodia. We're also joined by Lim Tai Wei. He's a senior lecturer at Singapore University of Social Sciences. And finally, in Washington, D.C. is Murray Hibbert. He's the senior director for Southeast Asia at the Center of Strategic and International Studies. Gentlemen, I thank you very much for joining us. Murray, if I could begin with you. Are these two nations, China and Cambodia, just allies of convenience?
Well, I mean, very certainly. As we've seen, Hun Sen has cracked down on the domestic opposition, the political party. He's got the leader in prison. He's chased most of the other opposition parliamentarians out of the country, and he's able to do this. He's also suspended a lot of the cooperation with the United States, kicked out NGOs that are involved in the election process, helping train political parties. He's really very nervous about what would happen in the elections in 2018. And so he's looked increasingly to China over the last few years, depending more and more on China on investment for foreign aid. China is now the biggest aid donor, the biggest investor, and he can do this because he can do these political steps because he no longer has to look to the United States and Europe for assistance and support.
So, Soy, from Hun Sen's perspective, with the Europeans and the Americans, they have strings attached to aid and trade and all of that. With China, that's not the case. They just want a stable trading partner in Southeast Asia. So is it the perfect marriage right now? No matter what Hun Sen does domestically, the Chinese will do business with him?
We can say that Cambodian is do their own business to strengthen the bilateral with China against the United States, because you see, China now has become the biggest investor, become the biggest donor in Cambodia. So that is the way that Hun Sen want to see more strengthened as the two leaders of the two countries has promised, pledged by year 2010 and by 2017, this is up to $5 billion US by this year. So no matter how that Cambodia has to keep its promise with China as they already pledged by in year 2010.
Right.
Anyway, for the
right. Let me bring in Lim Tai Wei and ask him, what, in a nutshell, what does China want ultimately from supporting Cambodia?
I think the principal item that China wants to cooperate with Cambodia, probably the Belt and Road Initiative, and China has plans for a pan-Asian railway, and the railway will run through Cambodia. It wants to promote connectivity with ASEAN countries, because the ASEAN Economic Community was quietly formed in December 2015. So I think the principal sort of level of cooperation is along the lines of infrastructure, especially the railway system, but also ports and other facilities that can help with logistics movement and also transportation of people. So I think that's the primary sort of a platform for the two countries to cooperate.
Right. So,
it is all part of the rubric of the Belt and Road Initiative,
right.
Which is the single most important economic policy.
Okay, let's ask Sebastian. Sebastian, when the Chinese Foreign Ministry comes out and says in relation to the crackdown on the CNRP and the imprisonment of Kem Sokha, they say China supports the Cambodian side's efforts to protect political stability and achieve economic development. And it goes on to say it will hold smooth elections next year. Does it tell us everything we need to know that they will not in any way put any pressure on Hun Sen to deal differently with political opposition at home?
China hews to, or claims to hew to, a doctrine of mutual non-interference. One of the things that Hun Sen has always resented about the Western influence in Cambodia is its constant pressure to maintain democratic standards and uphold good governance. Ever since the current democratic system was introduced in Cambodia in the early 1990s by a UN peacekeeping mission, Hun Sen's government has always resented this democratic system as a Western imposition on Cambodia. And what China has basically done is given him the freedom to rearrange the political landscape to his liking and essentially to reset the political status quo in a manner that's much more in line with his own perceived political interests. And so, one thing that China has given Hun Sen, which he's always struggled to get from Western countries, is legitimacy.
Right.
And by kind of re-emphasizing, the need for Cambodia to make its own decisions and the fact that China will not interfere in Cambodian affairs, China is giving Hun Sen what he's always wanted, which is, equality, or nominal equality at least, and legitimacy, as the leader of his nation, which is something he's always struggled to get elsewhere.
Right. Murray, before, even preceding this recent crackdown, the imprisonment of Kem Sokha, the sending into exile of opposition leaders, China was investing much more money in the country than, for example, the United States. Over a 4-year period between 2012 and 2016, they invested 30 times more than the United States. So might there be an argument to say that you snooze, you lose? Maybe under the Obama administration, they took their eye off the ball and allowed China to swallow up Cambodia and bring it into its orbit.
Well, the United States has long had some difficulties with Hun Sen's policies, and so they've given aid in certain areas like health, education, but the U.S. never does give infrastructure aid like China does. In reality, the U.S. leaves infrastructure development really to the private sector, and so yes, the U.S. has not been building up a lot of aid infrastructure in the country. But I would just like to add to one other comment on the Singapore colleague who talked about why China is doing some of this. The other thing that besides a platform for Belt and Road, etc., China is also looking for a country that is going to do its bidding within the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, the grouping that includes all of Southeast Asia. When they make statements on the South China Sea opposing China's assertiveness, when the ASEANs want to do that, Cambodia has always stood in the way and been able to block the consensus which is needed to put out any statements. So really, Hun Sen, beyond some other things, is also giving Cambodia a voice and China a voice within the Association of Southeast Asian Nations.
Lim Tai Wei, do you agree with that? That China also wants an ally within ASEAN so that it can get its way with things like the South China Sea?
Yes, China is trying to reach out to ASEAN countries, and Cambodia is not the only one. In fact, China is working closely with Laos on the Sino-Laotian Railway. And this month, the Thai government has just approved the Sino-Thai Railway. And of course, the President Duterte of the Philippines has been quite friendly with Beijing. So I think Cambodia is one of these ASEAN countries that, as the colleague just mentioned, is working closely with in order to extend its cooperation as well as influence in the ASEAN region. And not only that, Cambodia is also a strongman regime and is looking towards Beijing. There's some kind of complementarity between the two strongman regimes, and there seems to be also some emulation of political, economic systems between the two. And many have even said that the industrial zone of Sihanoukville in Cambodia is somewhat has some resemblance of an industrial park in China, like in industrial parks in Shenzhen, for example. So I think there is some kind of convergence in some features between the two countries in both political and economic terms.
So, Soy, the Europeans and the Americans, they want to do something about the political crackdown, the closing of journalistic enterprises, media houses, sending people out of the country, right? They want to do something. So they want to impose sanctions. But as far as I understand, the Cambodian people, from factory workers to politicians, fear that this will hurt the economy and it will hurt ordinary Cambodians. To what extent is that the majority view, that these sanctions are going to hurt the economy?
Just think that these sanctions, I think, will not be imposed because it is just from this parliamentary, only from the Congress of the United States and from the European parliamentary, not yet from each government of the government of the White House or the EU. I think this imposed economic sanction will not be happen because this is just a first step that the US and the European come together and again Cambodia, because as you know, Cambodian is pro as far for China more than the other country, and I think this impose will not be happen in my viewpoint of view, and we're not.
Certainly. Yeah. Okay, let me bring in Sebastian. Sebastian, is this a bit of a conundrum for the Europeans and the Americans because they want to do something about it, right? So you see, for example, the CNRP opposition leaders in Europe, in the United States, being given a platform. They're talking about human rights abuses. They're talking about wanting to bring democracy and change. The Europeans and the Americans want to impose sanctions. If they do, Hun Sen says, you see, the opposition are working with those foreigners against us. They want to impose a kind of Western color revolution, their words, not even mine, in our country. They want to hurt us, and therefore you need me, you don't need them. Is that a bit of a conundrum? Is there anything that Western nations can really do?
It's hard to say. The West finds itself in a little bit of a bind right now. I mean, it's unclear. I mean, there's certainly a lot of things it could do to punish the Cambodian government. The withdrawal of preferential trade access to European and American markets, which Cambodia relies heavily on, could create a lot of headaches for the Hun Sen government. The question, however, is how that will advance the cause of democracy in Cambodia. I think the last 25 years of Cambodian history shows that Western pressure it's been able to extract occasional concessions from the Cambodian government. For instance, letting somebody out of prison, or loosening the shackles of repression at certain times. But ultimately, Hun Sen has been able to maintain his control. And I feel like sanctions are a very blunt instrument, and it's easy to force the government to undertake certain actions, but it's much more difficult, to kind of force them essentially to adopt a democratic mindset, which they oppose on principle. And so, it's unclear to me what the next step really is. I think it makes sense for there to be some sort of reaction from Western capitals, but I think they should be careful to make sure that they adhere to the principle of first do no harm in any interventions that they might choose to undertake.
Murray, would Hun Sen be able to survive without China?
Oh, it'd be very much harder. But as Sebastian said, if they did go after the garments, the EU and the United States, it would really hurt the garment workers, of which there are several 100,000 in Phnom Penh. These are mostly women from rural areas that are supporting their families through these jobs. So it would really hurt one sector very badly. But I think Hun Sen could very quickly make up for any losses by turning to the Chinese. But and it would not. He's very anxious about what's going to happen in his elections. He's not in July 2018. He's not going to bend easily at this point. Does he relax after the elections a little bit again? Maybe. Who knows?
Lim Tai Wei, this relationship between Cambodia and China, does it represent a new reality in the region? Are we going to see more and more of these types of relationships where China's a sort of senior partner with nations that are within its sphere of influence?
In the economic realm, it does seem to be so, because China is already the top 3 trading partner, as well as investor and importer and exporter with ASEAN countries. I think it's possible to see that China is already a dominant economic player. At the same time, ASEAN countries are coming together within the Organization of Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and they're trying to leverage on the scale that the regional organization can offer in order to be able to reach out to all major powers in the region, not just China, but also EU, Japan, Russia, India, and Australia. So I think ASEAN is trying to leverage all these major powers in order to play a neutral role, and also keep its traditional friendships with the US and Japan, which are countries that have helped ASEAN as well ASEAN countries to develop their economies. So the sort of outcome really depends on how much ASEAN can progress to forge itself as an organization, what kind of cohesiveness it can achieve in the coming years, and also how far the ASEAN economic community can strengthen and reach out to all these countries. And actually, ASEAN is the only vehicle in the region that is driving East Asian regionalism, because it has the neutrality, the objectivity, and also the friendships with all these major powers to do so.
Okay, gentlemen, I've got to move on, but I thank you all for joining us. Murray Hibbert, Soy Sopiap, Sebastian Strangio, and Lim Tai Wei. Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.
If the authorities have made it possible for us to come with these slogans, that the resources belong to oligarchs, if we discuss that our land might go to China, and if people say that Kazakhstan's people are increasingly being turned into slaves, then we can draw the conclusion that the incumbent authorities, who over their 20-year rule have done what we see now.
Kazakhstan's president has been in power since 1991, and Nursultan Nazarbayev likely sees himself as somewhat of a popular leader. And why wouldn't he? At the last election, he won more than 97% of the vote. But with the country in the midst of an economic crisis, many see that result as a little unusual. Critics say Nazarbayev is becoming increasingly authoritarian and accuse him of suppressing dissent, whether it's the media or political opposition. But at the start of the year, he surprised many by promising reforms, including devolving some of his power to the parliament. So, has there been much progress? Well, my guest today is the country's former Prime Minister, Akhajan Kajageldin. He now heads the opposition Republican People's Party of Kazakhstan, but lives in exile. He joins us now from Berlin. Sir, thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Has President Nursultan Nazarbayev done a good job?
I don't believe so, because it's not first time he promising people to change the life and to bring something to make people equally approaching something from national health and develop family and the future of their kids. And he's many times, last 10 years, promising Kazakh nations to challenge all this new problem with lawfully and to share the power with Kazakh nation, but never delivered that. The same thing happened with what he have done beginning of 2017. Today is almost end of 2017. We have seen any good evidence to clear that we approach something good.
Okay, and understandably, because you ran against him almost 2 decades ago, and that led to you going into exile. Maybe, you know, there's a personal gripe here, right? But why don't you give him a chance? He's saying he's devolving his power into 3 branches of government. Maybe give him, I don't know, 18 months and see whether it is true reform. Isn't that fair?
From beginning, I was not brutally challenged his power ever since I left my country. I've always been open to discuss and open for dialogue. And we've been promising a lot of good stuff for administration to take right way, is our understanding, for our nations. And also I was welcome last year his offer to power sharing idea. But in fact, the power is not sharing. All the power concentrated under one hand. That's the biggest problem of my country right now.
Okay. And is there maybe a silver lining in foreign policy, given that Kazakhstan is trying to position itself as a country that is at the forefront of nuclear non-proliferation? It's hosting the Astana talks. Would you be willing to concede that on the foreign policy front, it's finding itself as a middleman and a peacemaker between Russia and the West and everybody in between? Isn't that encouraging?
Oh, probably yes, because he's always trying to find the route for a red carpet and to be in the center of any global focus. And some of his initiative is we can welcome, is not too bad, really. But problem of my nation is to save independency, to develop our economy, to make life is much better, and to be ready to any sort of challenge we can face, including unrestful Central Asia in the south, and being exactly between 2 big powers, Russia and China. It's not big, it's not easy task for him. We understand that, but the #1 issue is domestically to make people loyal, not by the taking more and more power, and by the right route.
There was a recent coal miner strike. Certainly.
Moral.
Certainly, there was a recent coal miner strike in Karagandi, in the central part of the country. Now, what's interesting is that the opposition Nationwide Social Democratic Party, the OSDP, brought itself at the forefront. It was noisy. It was covered in state media. Doesn't that tell you that there might be the little inklings of things opening up a little bit more, and that if the strike was allowed to happen, the opposition party was allowed to have a voice and state media covered it, it might be a little bit healthy?
The #1 issue is it's not first strike, it's come out to public eye, so and taking attention. If you remember, bloodshed of end of 2011, with finished the 6-month strike, oil field workers against their ownership. And this is very sad picture, but strike itself is not a surprise. Any democracy can face strike by pilots, strike by railway workers, etc. The problem is people hopeless that they not believe the local government, and that why they appeal to president. But my understanding is not the issue for him. If the law is working in my country, if there is agreement between owners and trade union and the workers, it can be resolved without any involvement from high power. And it's not the opposition organization, they're not reluctant to be in this process. The problem is they banned from central TV, they banned from central radio. It's very hard for them to work with people. There is no dialogue with opposition figures at all.
What would make you go back and give up on being in exile? What would make you go home?
I'm ready to go home yesterday, and I have a lot of interesting idea. And Mr. Nazarbayev knows the part of my idea, what to do with stolen money, how to develop our economy, how to diversify economy and develop infrastructure, keep the people happy and busy, and help the neighbor country to develop their own economy, because the Kazakhstan has good approach to be middle of this process. He knows that, I know that, and I hope that one day we can approach this idea. But anyhow, I'm always on the my nation side, and I don't want him to collapse to approach my idea. I'm always believe that in peaceful process. This is my agenda.
If President Nazarbayev invited you back and said, come and help, you're my former prime minister, what happened over the past 19 years is water under the bridge, would you go back?
If there is condition, which I believe supposed to be, and the idea of power sharing is going to be a real agenda, I'm ready to take any position useful for my nations. It's not about my ego to approach something on the top of the power. Absolutely not. I'm ready to work any position, but I believe it should be serious, and it have to be that serious to bring back the national trust to power. Right now, it's gone.
Former Prime Minister of Kazakhstan, Akajan Kajageldin. Sir, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. And that's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Next time, the UN is set to condemn the US's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. We'll debate what impact it'll have. Until then, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.